This is the starting point, a small, rain-sodden island off the northwestern edge of continental Europe. By 1920, the territory controlled by this single island covered roughly 24% of the Earth's total land surface. Within these borders lived 412 million people, 1/4 of the global population at the time, all governed under the British Crown. 19th-century imperialists attributed this dominance to a grand master plan, or inherent cultural superiority. But the actual mechanics of this expansion were rooted in a series of interlocking advantages that began to stack on top of one another. Success in one region provided the capital and military means to secure the next, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of expansion. To understand how the modern world took shape, we have to dissect how geography, finance, industry, and opportunistic exploitation interlocked to build the largest political entity in human history. The foundation of this system was a simple geographic reality. The more money a nation spends on its borders, the less it has for expansion. Continental rivals like France and Spain shared land borders with hostile neighbors, leaving them constantly vulnerable to invasion. To survive, these nations were forced to drain their treasuries to maintain massive, expensive standing armies. Britain, meanwhile, used the English Channel as a defensive moat. Because the island did not require a massive land army for basic survival, the state redirected its national wealth into naval power and maritime infrastructure. This isolation provided an environment of continuous political stability. It allowed the British state to prioritize commercial growth and aggressive overseas expansion over territorial defense. That commercial focus accelerated in 1600 with the founding of the East India Company. Colonialism shifted from a pursuit of royal prestige to a strictly profit-driven enterprise. This shows the joint stock company. Instead of a single monarch bearing the cost, financial risk is fractured into smaller shares for private investors. As colonial goods return as profits, they're immediately reinvested. This mobilized vast private wealth for ventures no government could afford alone. The financial system upgraded again following the 1688 Glorious Revolution, which imported advanced Dutch banking practices into London. The anchor of this power was the Bank of England. Founded in 1694, the bank issued consols, bonds providing the government with continuous, cheap credit. Backed by secure property rights and the rule of law, London became the safest place in the world to park capital. Sophisticated finance became Britain's ultimate weapon. In conflicts like the 7 Years' War, the ability to borrow money at low interest rates allowed Britain to simply outspend and bankrupt its rivals. By the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution transformed Britain into the workshop of the world, creating a new set of drivers for expansion. This photograph of a mechanized cotton mill captures the scale of the demand. To keep these bobbins turning, Britain needed an endless supply of raw materials and new overseas markets to absorb its manufactured goods. Industrialization also handed British forces a devastating technological advantage over non-industrialized societies. Wooden sailing vessels were replaced by iron-hulled steamships, while smoothbore muskets were phased out for high-rate breech-loading rifles. The mechanical feed of the Maxim gun, shown here, illustrates this shift toward industrialized warfare. At the Battle of Durman in 1898, a British-led force killed 10,000 modest warriors while suffering fewer than 500 casualties. Industry stripped colonial expansion of its initial risks, replacing the slow contest between equal empires with a rapid, industrialized expansion into the non-Western world. This expansion created a massive disparity in numbers. An elite British bureaucracy of roughly 1,000 men governed an Indian subcontinent of 300 million people. The British managed this through indirect rule. Looking at the integrated seating arrangement in this photograph, we see the strategy. British officials co-opted existing local elites, preserving traditional hierarchies and placing themselves at the top. This required intense opportunism. Britain exploited the internal decay of rival powers, like the fracturing Mughal Empire in India or divided kingdoms across Africa, positioning themselves as arbiters and playing factions against one another. They also deployed the sepoy system, mobilizing the military manpower of their own conquered subjects to police their regions and wage wars in other territories. The British Empire functioned as a parasitic administration, expanding cheaply by hijacking existing local hierarchies and weaponizing the very populations it subjugated. The early economic foundations of this machine were heavily financed by the brutal extraction of the transatlantic slave trade and Caribbean plantation economies. Even after the empire abolished slavery in 1833, the core economic model remained strictly extractive. This flowchart tracks the drain of wealth. Raw resources leave India, convert to manufactured goods in Britain, and return to colonial markets, with the surplus diverted to London. Consequently, India's domestic textile industry collapsed, deindustrializing the subcontinent. The human toll was severe. Demands for exportable cash crops, combined with a refusal to provide adequate relief, directly contributed to the deaths of millions in manufactured famines. The immense global power and wealth accumulated in London was built directly upon the systemic impoverishment, exploitation, and brutalization of the periphery. Ultimately, the imperial collapse was triggered by the massive financial exhaustion of the First and Second World Wars. By 1945, the cost of victory had bankrupted the British financial engine. The nation became dependent on American economic support through the Marshall Plan. The ideological justifications for empire also dissolved. A global war fought explicitly against racial hierarchy and domination left colonial rule morally indefensible. At the same time, decades of organized anti-colonial nationalism reached a critical mass, with local leaders utilizing British legal and political frameworks to dismantle the system from within. This photograph of the crowd at the Red Fort in Delhi captures the momentum of decolonization. In 1947, Britain lost India, the jewel of the empire, because it could no longer afford to hold it. Look at these protest signs from the 1956 Suez Crisis. When Britain attempted to reassert imperial control over the canal, American pressure and domestic rejection forced a humiliating withdrawal. The imperial machine finally stalled when its financial reserves were exhausted by global war, while organized resistance across the colonies made continued governance prohibitively expensive.